In Iran, rising anger towards America sets off one of the most dramatic hostage crises of the 20th century, one that will change the course of two nations and eventually bring down a presidency.
I don't think that the Carter administration really understood the intensity of the firestorm in which they were about to be caught up.
While the world watches, another drama involving Canada and the CIA unfolds behind the scenes.
I mean, lives were literally at stake. These were people who were in trouble. We were in a position to help them, and we sought to help them.
If we had been caught being hung in the city square or decapitated or whatever they wanted to do would be probably their first option.
For some, the secret mission is considered one of the most dangerous diplomatic operations in Canadian history. For others, it is known simply as the Hollywood option. President Jimmy Carter, now in the third year of his presidency, faces a critical decision. He has just learned that a man named Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, known around the world simply as the Shah, seeks permission to enter the United States for medical treatment. Weakened by cancer, the Shah is a dying man, but he is also a controversial figure in American foreign policy. For almost 3 decades, the Shah ruled the Middle Eastern country of Iran as a key American ally, his strong-arm dictatorship supported by a steady flow of American aid.
By 1979, Iranians had lived under 25 years of increasingly repressive rule by the Shah. I think very few American officials, much less American citizens, understood the extent to which the United States had been involved in crushing Iranian democracy and the extent to which Iranians were still so angry about this.
By 1979, that anger has led to revolution. Forced into exile with his wife Farah Pahlavi, the Shah is now a wanted man in his own country.
He said, I do not want to keep my throne by spilling the blood of my compatriots. I can understand what he's feeling. Is this what I get after all I have done?
I was, one of those in the State Department argued strenuously against admitting him. I thought, if we're going to establish a relationship with this new revolutionary Iran, we can't maintain our old ties and our personal obligation to a man who worked with us for decades.
In Iran, the new revolutionary government is led by a religious fundamentalist named Ayatollah Khomeini. His resentment of both the Shah and the United States is heard in speeches throughout the country. Although the American embassy in Tehran remains open, it now becomes the site of frequent protests. For many Iranians, it is a symbol of 25 years of subservience.
Either we honor the Shah and close our embassy, or we keep our embassy going and we have to drop our relationship with him. I don't think I persuaded President Carter. I think he persuaded himself. He was faced with the question, will he keep him out or turn away a sick man from the hospital door, or will he admit him and take the international risk?
President Carter makes a potentially explosive decision. In late October, he opens the door to the ailing Shah. For many Iranians, two enemies have just been reunited.
When they saw the Shah showing up in America, they assumed in large numbers that this was to plot the Shah's return. The symbolism of him being admitted into the United States might well have been the episode that triggered the actual takeover of the embassy.
Within 2 weeks of the Shah entering the United States, a crowd of revolutionary students gathers outside the American embassy in Tehran. Inside, more than 60 Americans and 30 Iranian staff members are at work in a collection of buildings.
It began as any normal day. There were the usual bunch of demonstrators out in the street, several thousand, and we didn't pay a whole lot of attention to that. That was sort of part of the normal routine.
By mid-morning, the protest takes a menacing turn. A handful of students breach the main entrance, allowing more than 300 others to swarm the grounds.
We got a call from the people in the main building. They said the demonstrators were coming over the wall, and so better lock up your doors and windows.
I saw a couple running around in that inner courtyard between our building and the commissary. We didn't want them to see us, so we kind of kept our distance, and didn't want them to know that anybody was in that building.
They decided that everybody should go up to the second floor. We all went up to the second floor and gathered, basically kind of waiting to be told what to do. And in the meantime, there were footsteps on the roof.
Then the power went out, so we were now sitting in the dark, and people were starting to get a little upset. It was beginning to seem like this is not a good situation. We can't stay here for too long. We were on an alley, and we had a gate, a door right onto the street, and that would be normally where the visa applicants would mill around.
We sent all the visitors out first, and then the local employees, and then the 10 Americans were the last to go out.
Once outside, Iranian staff members quickly make their way home, while the Americans discuss their next move. They decide to split up. One group heads for nearby apartments.
They got about a block, and there was a guard tower right at the end of our street. When they got to the guard tower, they were arrested, basically, were captured.
5 Americans remain undetected: Bob Anders, Mark and Cora Lijek, and Joe and Kathy Stafford.
We were still operating with this assumption that this whole thing would blow over, maybe even later that day, so all we had to do was find a place to hang out for an hour, maybe a day at most.
The group tries to make a break for the British Embassy, only a few blocks away.
It seems to me we didn't make very many turns, but when we turned onto the main street to head toward the British Embassy, there was a demonstration going on there as well. And we got out of the way where people couldn't see us and talked for a few minutes trying to decide what to do, because we were not going to fight our way through a demonstration to get to the British Embassy.
Bob Anders' apartment is nearby. Although not secure, it allows them to regroup. Once inside, they turn on a two-way radio issued to embassy staff.
We could hear what was going on in the chancery, because even though the students had gotten in, the staff were behind secure doors, so the students hadn't reached them yet.
Gradually, more and more voices on the radio were speaking in Farsi and not in English, so it was pretty obvious that the whole place was gradually being taken over.
The 66 Americans still trapped inside the embassy finally surrender. They are bound and blindfolded. Now in complete control, the students issue their first public statement. No American hostages will be released until the United States hands over the Shah. Within hours, Khomeini throws his support behind the students, creating a standoff between nations. The American government's worst-case scenario is now a reality.
There were some people who wanted immediately to threaten the Iranians and to launch an attack on Iran, or I was dead set against it. Any effort to pressure the Iranians that way is bound to fail. We knew that since the revolution had succeeded, dozens or hundreds of Iranians had been executed after show trials. And we thought that could well happen to our staff.
We naturally in the United States were not only horrified by this episode, but we were baffled. We couldn't understand what we had done to provoke such hatred over there.
The fundamentalists, the revolutionaries in Iran, wanted the Shah back. They wanted him to face charges and face trial in Iran. And the friends of the Shah in the U.S., of course, were unwilling to do that.
We refuse to permit the use of terrorism and the seizure and the holding of hostages to impose political demands. No one should underestimate the resolve of the American government and the American people in this matter.
In Canada, Prime Minister Joe Clark watches events unfold in both Tehran and Washington. At 40, he is the youngest Prime Minister in Canadian history, battling to keep a 6-month-old minority government afloat.
Now, one has to bear in mind this was a major international issue, and there were legitimate questions about what Canada was going to do.
Canada still has citizens at the Canadian Embassy in Tehran, not far from the heart of the standoff. They are led by a young ambassador named Ken Taylor.
He was a very skilled and well-regarded diplomat. No one without those qualities would have gone to a difficult situation like Tehran. That was a wild time, and one couldn't be sure that normal diplomatic niceties, protocols would be followed.
In the days to come, Ambassador Taylor and Prime Minister Clark will be drawn into another crisis unfolding behind the scenes. Not far from the embassy compound, Bob Anders, the Lijeks, and the Staffords remain in hiding. Separated from more than 60 of their colleagues now held at gunpoint, they are fugitives inside of Iran. In Tehran, revolutionary students have overrun the American embassy, taking more than 60 hostages. Only a few blocks away, 5 Americans who escaped have been hiding out in a small apartment. To avoid capture, they realize they have to keep moving.
I worried about people visiting discovering the embassy housing records and visiting all the residences. I figured it was only a matter of time before somebody came to that house to look for any Americans who might have gotten away.
Leaving Bob Anders' apartment, the group narrowly evades capture by a group of Revolutionary Guards who are now searching the city for other Americans. After 4 desperate days, Bob Anders makes an important phone call. He contacts his friend John Sheardown, Chief Immigration Officer at the Canadian Embassy.
I'll never forget how he answered. He said, well, where are you? Why the hell didn't you call sooner? You know.
And then he advised us that he had other people, he advised me that he had other people with him, and I said, well, we got lots of room, Bob. Bring them along.
John and I had no hesitation in making that decision because we were well aware of the hostility towards the Americans, or towards foreigners as a whole.
It was the right thing to do.
In the wake of the call, Sheardown quickly consults with Canadian Ambassador Ken Taylor.
They apparently had tried other embassies, maybe more visible than ourselves to the Iranians, and those embassies had said, we don't think we can safely offer you a haven.
Sheltering the Americans could have grave repercussions. They seek their government's approval in a top-secret coded message. It lands on the desk of Canada's Secretary of State for External Affairs, Flora MacDonald. She is the first woman to hold the high-profile position.
This came as a great surprise to me, obviously. And of course, the whole situation with regard to Iran, with regard to the takeover of the American compound, was something that I had to follow very carefully.
In the House of Commons, Flora MacDonald breaks the news to the young Prime Minister, a move that will initiate one of the most dangerous diplomatic operations in Canadian history.
So we agreed literally on the spot in the House that she would communicate back through Canadian officials in external affairs to our embassy in Tehran, conveying our approval.
An American car carrying the 5 fugitives moves through a quiet residential street in northern Tehran. As a signal to the group, John Sheardown is outside watering his lawn.
I wanted to get them under cover as quickly as possible, so I opened our garage door.
Once inside, the group meets John's wife, Zena, and Ambassador Ken Taylor.
So they welcomed us, and we were very, very happy to be there. And
the fact that it was a government that was protecting us was reassuring.
I think Ken also said that the Prime Minister had personally approved our being there. We had found the obvious good hiding place. If there was one in Tehran, this was it.
To divide the risk, it is decided that Joe and Kathy Stafford will stay with Ken Taylor and his wife Pat. Bob Anders and Mark and Cora Lijek will remain at the Sheardowns. Once settled, the group gets the first glimpse of the fate they have so far escaped.
They were already broadcasting from the embassy. They were already showing some of the hostages and the fact that they were blindfolded, and it was pretty scary. We were actually pretty close to quite a lot of the people at the embassy. Hearing something's one thing, but actually seeing it, on TV, I think was just a little bit too difficult to watch.
The fact that the 5 Americans have escaped remains a closely guarded secret. They are referred to simply as the house guests in all coded messages between Tehran, Ottawa, and Washington.
There were very few people who could be in on this. The longer it went on, the more chance there was that someone would find out about this. And then, of course, Canadian personnel in our own embassy, as well as the Americans, would be in very grave danger.
Back in Canada, unaware of the risk now being run by the government, opposition leader Pierre Trudeau raises the international crisis daily in the House of Commons.
I was being pummeled for not providing greater help to the United States. Why wasn't Canada doing more? And we were doing as much as we could.
Mr. Speaker, in all our questions it's been clear that we're condemning the actions of the government of Iran in not taking firm steps to set free these hostages. But we'll soon be condemning this government if it continues to take such a standoffish attitude. The United States are our closest friend and ally. We've always said that when we need their help. Now's the time to make a statement of solidarity with the United States and to make it publicly at the head of state level, as Mr. Clark should be making a statement.
I am sure that the former Prime Minister recognizes that the Prime Minister has been staunch in his support of the United States in actions, many of which cannot be publicly conveyed and which he should be aware are taking place in everything we do.
In a rare move, Joe Clark crosses the Commons floor and quietly takes Pierre Trudeau into his confidence.
I think I told him quite starkly what had happened. We were trying to hold this as closely as we could, naturally. We were trying to do everything we could to avoid some kind of leak.
Despite their best efforts, by early December, the secret is no longer safe, turning the house guest situation into a dangerous race against time. The hostage crisis is 15 days old. Although 13 Americans are released, more than 50 remain at gunpoint. The revolutionary students in charge have one demand: the return of the exiled Shah, now resting in a New York City hospital.
Every minute we were listening to the news to see what happened. Of course, it was very hard for us because supposedly we were the excuse for this taking of hostages. But I believe that even if we had not come to America, they would have done something against America. So it was all excuses to embarrass Americans.
President Carter suspends oil imports from Iran and freezes Iranian assets in American banks. While continuing to seek a peaceful solution, the White House draws up contingency plans for both rescue and attack.
If the hostages had been put on trial and if some of them had been executed, that would have meant a war between the United States. I don't think President Carter would have hesitated a minute before sending in the planes. You know, it would have been a disaster for us and even more so for them.
Separated from the main group of hostages, 5 Americans continue to hide out in 2 Canadian residences. American attaché Lee Schatz joins the group. Having also escaped the takeover, he has been camping out at the Swedish embassy. Although so far spared the ordeal of their colleagues, the long wait is taking its toll.
Each day is the same, and you have no control over the situation. There's really nothing much you can do.
They had to be suffering from cabin fever because they seemed to be indoor. I mean, they had to stay indoors, out of sight for so much of the time. We knitted together as a group. We cared about each other as a group, as a family.
I think that we and the Canadians assumed that if we were ever found, that we would all end up in the same place together. So they took a great risk.
As we were there longer and longer, we began to feel like something needs to be done to get us out of here.
With the chance of exposure growing by the day, Ken Taylor and his staff at the Canadian Embassy come up with possible escape plans for the small group.
We began thinking of how are we going to get our friends out of here. That is overland, a pretty desperate way to go. There was the possibility of going to the Abadan and going through to an oil tanker. There was a possibility of going out into just outside the city limits of Fairmount and having a helicopter come down. We went through everything.
Given the risks of overland travel, the best option is to have the group leave through the airport under fake Canadian identification. But getting input from the U.S. State Department proves difficult.
We had come up with these alternatives, but nothing much seemed to be happening, and they weren't our diplomats.
We didn't feel a sense of urgency as we did with the main group of hostages.
Canada had a different problem than the United States did. The United States defined their problem as 50 people still in captivity. We defined our problem as having 6 people we had to get out, because if we didn't get them out quickly, they would be in danger, but so would Canadians.
At a NATO meeting in Europe, Flora MacDonald confronts U.S. Secretary of State Cyrus Vance.
And I said, you know, if you're not going to do anything to cooperate to get these people out of Tehran, then what I'm going to do is put them on bicycles and have them bicycle north and west and over the border into Turkey. I think he was somewhat taken aback when I said this, but nevertheless it was enough to show him that we were concerned.
With his experience inside Iran, CIA officer Antonio Mendez arrives in the nation's capital, assigned to work closely with the Canadians on an escape plan.
Canada understood the stakes that we were playing for and were willing to, bravely step up to the plate. Canada was able to make decisions much quicker than I think than the U.S. was.
There were 3 pins. There was Washington, Ottawa, and Tehran.
Ken Taylor was the guy in the field, and I was the guy at headquarters, and we were communicating through Ottawa.
The group agrees the airport in Tehran is the best escape route. But first they must come up with a cover story to explain what 6 travelers are doing inside Iran. Proposed options include nutritionists, oil industry technicians, and school teachers, each one posing its own risks.
those groups that we knew were going were typically either well known to the Iranian officials or closely controlled. We wanted somebody who could just surface in country and look like they got there for some innocent purpose.
Simultaneously, Flora MacDonald searches for a way around a critical obstacle, securing legitimate Canadian passports for the American houseguests.
The law says only Canadians can get Canadian passports. If non-Canadians were to receive Canadian passport, it would have to be done through this special order in council. That was going to take some maneuvering because there were only a few people, 2 or 3 others in cabinet who knew anything about this.
Flora consults with Prime Minister Joe Clark. Together, they come up with a plan to conceal from cabinet the secret mission that is now unfolding.
Mr. Clark and I worked out that somehow this would be the last item on a very heavy cabinet agenda, that we would leave it till the end. And then as I introduced it and started to explain what it was about, Mr. Clark would interrupt me.
I said, I don't think there's any need for discussion on this without explaining what was at issue.
And the meeting broke up. And I went off with approval to issue these passports.
In Washington, the CIA forges Iranian visas into the passports. That same week, with identification in place, Mendez strikes on a bold idea, one whose very strength lies in its improbability. He proposes masquerading the 6 houseguests as Canadian members of a Hollywood production company.
Everybody in the world kind of knows about Hollywood. Everybody in the world would like to either be involved with Hollywood or meet somebody who is. And the third thing about Hollywood is they're so eccentric that they wouldn't care what the political situation was anyway if they were looking for the right hill or the right bazaar in which to shoot their movie.
In the days ahead, the CIA will be back inside Iran, this time on a mission involving Canada, 6 fugitives, and an elaborate cover story known as the Hollywood Option. While preparing to help 6 Americans escape from Iran, the Canadian embassy braces itself for the possible fallout. They destroy classified files and scale back staff to a skeleton crew. Meanwhile, 12,000 kilometers away in California, Antonio Mendez begins work on a CIA cover story to help with the escape. Through a connection in the film industry, he meets Bob Seidel, a veteran Hollywood insider.
I was introduced to him as the guy from the CIA. He explained that there was a problem and they needed some assistance, and would I be available? I said, sure, I'm available. I'm in between jobs. What else?
Together, Mendez and Seidel formed Studio 6, a fake company named after the 6 houseguests trapped in Iran.
Studio 6 was about implementing a fantasy. We created this entire concept on paper on Saturday from maybe 8 o'clock in the morning until it got dark. We basically created 6 fictional characters. We gave them backgrounds, we gave them schooling, we even gave them motion picture credits.
Studio 6's fake movie project is named Argo.
We commandeered a script that had another name. It was a project that was defunct. And it was a sci-fi, mythological kind of story. We just took the cover off of it, and everywhere in the script where it mentioned the name of the movie, we changed it to Argo.
There's an underground market in Tehran, and this was going to be the reason that this location crew was in Tehran, is they were looking at that as locations for this science fiction movie. We needed a cover that would stand up to scrutiny. We went ahead and rented the space with it furnished, put in phone lines, and we put in 3 lines.
The first 2 phone numbers are listed on business cards printed for the house guests. The 3rd number is known only to Mendez, to be used in the event of an emergency.
And my wife got into the act, and we recruited her to be office secretary, and she answered the phone. As soon as all the articles hit the Variety Reporter, we started getting phone calls. Everybody I knew in the business wanted a job.
With Studio 6 up and running, Mendez awaits the final go-ahead. That same day in Iran, an anonymous phone call comes into Ambassador Taylor's residence, where 2 of the house guests are hiding. Pat Taylor answers.
And this sort of neutral voice said, "I'd like to speak to Joe or Kathy Stafford." And they were the 2 people we had in the house. Of course, I had to be calm and tell them that I didn't know what he was talking about.
So it was clear that others were figuring this out. So it became an emergency. So I got a message back from headquarters in 20 minutes saying, "The president has approved your mission, good luck." And that's one of the few times I've ever heard about the president personally approving a clandestine mission of this sort.
A Canadian diplomatic pouch quietly arrives in Iran by courier. Along with passports, it includes driver's licenses and credit cards provided by Ottawa. It also contains documents for the Hollywood option and 2 backup scenarios involving businessmen and school teachers. In the next few days, Mendez and another CIA colleague known only as Julio touched down in Tehran under their own false identification, posing as the project manager and financier for Studio 6. That afternoon, the CIA team meets with Ken Taylor and Roger Lucy at the Canadian Embassy, where a critical problem surfaces. Roger Lucy notices an error in the Iranian visas forged inside the passports by the CIA.
Whoever had put the dates in the visa had gone on the assumption that the Iranian calendar began like ours on the 1st of January. It gave them visas that were actually issued sometime in the future, which probably would have caught somebody's attention at the airport.
When he found that out and sent that information back to us in Ottawa, I mean, we were, what now? I mean, has the whole cover been blown?
Working carefully, the group fixes the problem on the spot, hoping the alteration will escape notice. That night, the 6 house guests are assembled at the Sheardown residence. Their hosts, John and Zena Sheardown, have already left the country as part of the drawdown at the Canadian Embassy.
Tony was brought to dinner. We didn't know who he was, and they said that it was time for us to be taken out of Iran.
It was a very warm, friendly encounter. The first impression was that they were happy to see us and they were ready to get out.
The group is presented with all 3 possible cover stories. As they will have to live the roles, they will make the final decision.
One was to be some businessmen and business people. One was for us to be a group of teachers.
The second one was a non-starter because the international school was closed.
The third one was the film idea. We thought that, you know, the average person, business person, school teacher would not be coming to Iran during the revolution. But film people, yeah, they probably would go somewhere even if there was trouble, because that might actually excite them or be interesting.
Revolution, who cares? You know, we're Hollywood, people will cooperate with us.
Each house guest is given a portfolio to memorize, full of identification, biographical information, and key props.
My name is Mark Lyjak. In 1980, I was briefly Joseph Earl Harris, scouting locations in Iran for the movie Argo.
I'm Cora Ambrin Lyjak, but back in 1980, I was Teresa Harris, a scriptwriter.
My name is Bob Andrews. I was known as Robert Baker, location manager.
My name is Antonio Mendez, and I'm also known as Kevin Costa Harkins, the production manager from Studio 6.
After being given time to study their covers, Roger Lucey takes each house guest through mock interviews.
Some of these people are a little bit too sure of themselves. And sure enough, those are the ones that were tripped up. They hadn't remembered what their birthplace was, or they hadn't remembered when they got their visa or where.
After numerous rehearsals, they studied the trip through the airport. The group will have 2 airline tickets each, one on Swiss Air and a backup on British Airways. The main hurdle is immigration and a 2-part customs form.
When you come in, you fill out the top sheet, transfers to the bottom sheet. The top sheet is white, the bottom sheet is yellow, and the immigration officer retains the top sheet. And when you leave, presumably they can match up the 2.
While the house guests have forged yellow copies in their passports, no arrival copy exists with immigration. If Iranian officials try to match them, the plan will be foiled. With everything in place, the 6 house guests are picked up by Canadian embassy vehicles. They make their way towards Tehran's international airport. After 3 months in hiding, everything hinges on the next few hours.
And once we were in the car, that's kind of when the play acting really started, because the drivers didn't know who we were. I kept checking my pockets. I kept checking to see if there was anything that had my real name on it.
We were definitely going on adrenaline. I don't recall having any second thoughts about it, any doubts. Obviously, there's some level of fear.
If we had been caught, the Revolutionary Guard would have decided to make an example of us being hung in the city square or decapitated, or whatever they wanted to do would be probably their first option.
Just before dawn, 6 fugitives approach Tehran's international airport. Posing as members of a film company named Studio 6, they plan to fly out of a country that still holds more than 50 of their compatriots at gunpoint. Inside the terminal, Antonio Mendez has arrived early.
They were looking in, they saw me. That way they got the signal that it was okay to come in past the security people.
I was pretty nervous going into the building. When we entered, there was a fairly large open room initially where the airline counters were.
We went to the ticket counters and got our boarding passes. There were some armed guards around, the self-appointed Revolutionary Guards that were monitoring the airport.
After checking their luggage, the group moves towards immigration, the main barrier standing between them and their freedom.
Lee went first and Tony Mendez went last, and we kind of deliberately spaced ourselves out so that even though on one level you could tell we were a group, we weren't supposed to all go through together.
It's the principles of magic and illusion. It's stage management. Immigration's the choke point. This is where you have to lay down your documents along with the yellow sheet, and hope that the guy doesn't go in the back room and try to find the white sheet for everybody.
Trying to remain calm, the group hands in their passports and forged customs cards.
The immigration guy looked at our collection of documents, got up, and went into the back room. So that was an anxious moment. What is he doing?
We toyed briefly with the thought of just walking through without having our passports stamped.
10,000 kilometers away in Ottawa, Flora MacDonald braces herself for the possible fallout.
I was concerned, uptight all that evening about, you know, what would happen. Would they make it out?
At the same time, Bob Seidel sits nervously in the Studio 6 offices in Hollywood. His wife, Andy, monitors the 3 phone lines.
We had their sort of lives in our hands. So every time the phone rang, she was basically a jagged nerve ending.
Back in Tehran, the customs officer returns.
He came out stirring a cup of tea. He was taking a tea break.
He was taking a break, and he came and looked at our documents.
All the documents were stamped, the back of our yellow sheets, which he retained. We all started moving then into the departure lounge.
Another problem surfaces. The Swiss Air flight is inexplicably delayed.
Tony gathered us in a corner, and we talked about maybe we should switch to the British Airways flight, but it just didn't seem to be any sort of easy way to do that without drawing attention to ourselves.
But our other options were drying up. KLM was leaving, British Air was leaving. It was going to be Swiss Air or nothing.
So he said, you know, let's just sit it out and it'll be okay. And it was amazing. After 20 minutes, they said everything was fine and we could board the plane.
The phone rang. It was about 2 o'clock in the morning. And this voice at the other end said to me, "Minister, they're out."
At Studio 6, the emergency line rings for the first and only time. Andy Seidel answers it.
She came to the door of the office I was in, as white as a sheet, said, "The phone just rang." And I said, "Yeah, I heard it. Who was it?" She says, No, the phone, the line just rang. And all somebody said was, "We're out. And everything's okay."
In Tehran, those left at the Canadian embassy prepare for their own departure. They issue a final coded message.
We had sent one that we mission accomplished in a sense, and we soon got a reply back that was very, very short, very succinct, and the closing line was, will go down, at least in my mind in diplomatic literature, was, "See you later, exfiltrator."
After stopping in Europe, the 6 houseguests arrive back in North America to widespread celebration. Canadian Ambassador Ken Taylor is swept up on a wave of American gratitude, receiving a hero's welcome.
It resonated in a very positive way, and it was about Canada. Maybe I was a bit more visible than the other people in the embassy, but it was about Canada, not about Ken Taylor.
It was quite amazing, people rushing into Canadian consulate offices throughout North America saying, "Thank you, Canada, thank you, Canada." Because it was the first really good news in more than a year. And suddenly the Americans had a very good friend, and the friend who had taken a chance, had taken a risk on their behalf. And the sense of relief and the outpouring of gratitude was quite spectacular.
For the safety of the hostages still inside Iran, all details of the CIA's collaboration with Canada are kept secret. After only 1 month in business, Studio 6 quietly closes its doors.
People like Spielberg and Lucas and others were sending over scripts, so we had like 26 scripts or something that had been sent in that were worth thinking about if we were a real production company.
We just sort of faded into the mists like Brigadoon, and nobody knew anything about it.
It is the case that not many people come to the aid of a superpower. Superpowers don't often need it, but the Americans in particular, I think, sense that they are more often alone than helped. And here was a case where when they were in need, people came and helped them.
They gave us the breathing room. They gave us the sanctuary when we needed it, and that came from the Canadians.
You know, it's pretty amazing. In a difficult situation, people put themselves in harm's way to help others. And, you know, lots of people put themselves on the line and helped us. And who knows what would have happened.
To say it's a Canadian operation or a CIA operation, to me, I think misses the point. I think it was a good example of cooperation between the two countries. A simple story with a good conclusion.